On to this now. The Democratic Alliance in the Western Cape says there's growing anxiety and despair among South Africans at government's increasing inability to deliver on its constitutional mandate. Now, the party says that this is why it would like to vote into law the proposed Powers Bill, which seeks to devolve national powers to give capable provinces and municipalities a chance to govern themselves. Well, this includes decision-making powers over policing, municipal, public transport, energy and electricity, among other issues. Well, let's speak to Sunday Times columnist Peter Bruce, who joins us this morning. Peter, good morning to you, and thank you for your time. Let's begin with an update, perhaps, of sorts, particularly for those people who have not been following this matter very closely. What is the Western Cape Provincial Powers Bill? What is it about, this law?
So, look, it's a kind of a new thing. So the province has complained for many years now, as you know, that the national government doesn't put enough effort into policing and into rail transport in the Cape, particularly around Cape Town. And so it's drawn up a bill which it claims to be constitutional. And there are parts of the Constitution which, if you read them, would appear to support that view. Not all parts of the Constitution, however. And so they are looking for greater autonomy. There are two things in the Cape. One is there's a small independence movement in the Cape. The DA government in the Cape claims that what it's looking for is more autonomy over its own affairs. And then to an extent you can see, the need for it, because the central government has been very bad at providing services. The Cape Town is a dangerous place and it could be safer. There are many, many hundreds of thousands of people affected by poor rail facilities, which should be better maintained. And the Cape Town municipality and the Cape provincial government think that they could do it better.
Yeah.
But the wider point, I think, Tolly, is that, in any country which is sort of vaguely federal like we are, with a strong central government or with a weak central government, is going to invite these kinds of pressures on it.
Yeah.
You look at Scottish nationalism in the UK. It springs from the same point. They think that London doesn't, pay them enough attention, and that London's basically useless and corrupt. There's separatist feelings or demands for greater autonomy in Spain from the Basque Country and from Catalonia as well. And so it's not an unreasonable thing to do. We already provinces are required to run their own health services and their own schools. What the Cape is saying, well, we're fine with that. Can we have a few more things, please? We'd like to do railways. We'd like to run our own ports because you can't. The government is putting private equity into Durban and Kucha, but not Cape Town. And Cape Town is a seriously important port for the mini farmers and fruit farmers around in the Cape. And so they think they can do it better. And what they're doing, of course, are a number of things. There's a little bit of political theatre involved here.
Yeah.
There's an election next year, so they need to be seen to be fighting for their people. There is an independence movement, and some white voters that might have originally voted DA might be swayed to go there, and so they're trying to hold them back by looking as if they're fighting for greater autonomy. But there's also a real case for greater autonomy in all South African provinces.
Yeah.
What the Spanish do very well is that they give most of their provinces autonomy, provided they can pass a means test. So, the Basques have their own police force. The Catalans raise their own taxes. Some provinces can't do anything, and everything's run from the central government. So it's a sort of uneven federalism that works. It works for the provinces that have none and that have what they want, because they can then compete for investment based on the fact that they do some things better than other provinces.
Peter, you've already touched on a number of issues which your piece deals with. I want to get to them point by point.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
apart from what an observer would say is the gradual evidence of incompetence in government as a whole, that observer will say, you point to crime, for example, that the Western Cape has been dealing with, and they will argue that South Africa is engulfed by criminal activity, which the police seem unable to stem. And so, is there evidence that one could point to say, this is evidence of targeted exclusion of the Western Cape government from certain services by the national government?
I'm not sure. I certainly think that the port is criminally neglected. I'm not sure about the thing with the police, and I just don't know enough. But certainly the port looks to me to be in a bad place. And I know that farmers, what be they exporting wine or fruit or whatever it is, have a really hard time with Cape Town.
Mm.
The railways too. I mean, there's this big fight going on with the railways because they simply don't. The passenger rail services there to Cape Town don't work, and it's caused a lot of problems because then taxis take over, and then there's a lot of violence, taxi violence in Cape Town, as they fight for business.
Ultimately, Peter, it is residents of the Western Cape, including business owners who have their companies set up shop there, who will say that indeed there has been improvement in this DA-run government of the Western Cape. But again, the question is, can the Democratic Alliance make a solid case before the Constitutional Court, should this matter get there, that indeed there is a case to be made for why the Western Cape wants to do what it wants to do?
Well, they're going to have to do that. I mean, this is clear. This would clearly go. So what will happen is that they're setting themselves up for a full-on legal confrontation. They want these powers. They claim they can get them. And if you look at, certain section 136, I think, of the Constitution, says that, one legislative or executive authority can transfer authority to another. Some of the schedules to the Constitution allow transfers. Others look as if they don't. And so there needs to be argument, and it needs to be settled. And I think that's the point here. And that's certainly what I was interested in, partly because I know the Spanish example, and I'm a great admirer of the way that they federalized, but also because we just need to know what the answer is here. We need, some finality. What can you do if you're a province more than what you are doing now?
Yeah.
The Constitutional Court is a great way to settle those kind of questions.
Sure. What you point out in your article, Peter, is that indeed there obviously will be political theatre as a result of the upcoming elections next year. And it's no secret. Yeah. It's no secret, Peter. I think we've all got to admit this, because the Auditor General is very clear and has consistently referred to municipalities in the Western Cape who are the largest contributors to clean audit outcomes. Is there indeed a case to be made, you think, for provinces to be given greater control over their affairs?
Well, I think there is, but only where they can exercise it. The Eastern Cape should not be allowed anywhere near a hospital. But there are some provinces that can run hospitals or schools or police or roads or rail transport, where there's expertise and where there's sufficient, good governance and money. Provinces can do their own things for themselves, and it relieves the pressure on the fiscus. It enables a spread of smarter people around the country rather than everyone gathering up in Gauteng. And it's good it would be good for South Africa. And if provinces were able to compete a little more unevenly with each other, they would probably end up, you'd probably end up in situations where some did better than others in terms of attracting investment. And that also that's not a bad thing, Some parts of the country can be better at doing things and attract investment and attract good, clever, smart people. And if they do that, then that's a plus for the country, because you can build on that and tax the wealth that they generate and, just redistribute it. At the moment, we're all sort of equally bad. And we're not creating we're not allowing circumstances to exist where you can create little points of light and brilliance.
Might we see the unexpected here, Peter Bruce, as the ANC moves to thwart this bill? Might we see the unexpected? What am I referring to? A renewed debate about either reducing the number of provinces or completely eliminating them. Do you think that this might gain traction as part of this political theater you talk about?
It could, but if it were to start, that the unintended consequences of that would be quite serious, I think, because you would then really begin to stoke the fires of ethnicity and nationalisms within your own country. Already they're there, I mean, there's already an independence movement in the Cape. There's already, Inkatha is, whatever you might think of it, it might be a sensible party in its politics, but basically it's an ethnic party. And it's a big one.
They'll challenge you on that. They will challenge you on that to say we are trying to grow outside of the KZN.
Yeah, not trying hard enough down in the Cape, I can tell you now. But you have to be careful about the unintended consequences of what you're trying to do. Provinces aren't great. Neither are metros, quite frankly. So you can't centralize everything. And the best way of holding this country together, I think, is to decentralize as much as you possibly can, so that everybody feels they're making a contribution.
Well, that's the point. I want to end this conversation, Peter, because you do say, as you wind up the article, that South Africa is one country. And in order to keep or protect that unitary state, there needs to be more federal governments. How does that make sense, and how do you think that will go down with the ANC?
Well, the ANC's got to grow up, and learn that it's got to be the adult in the room, to be honest. It's got to understand that you give your country roots and you give it wings. And you've got to trust your people. It's like raising kids. You've got to let them go. The only way they'll come back to you is if you treat them as adults, as if you treat them as competent humans.
And you think that perhaps the example of the United Kingdom, I mean, you see rumblings in Scotland where there were some people were cheering for King Charles III as the coronation moved there, while others were saying, "You're not my king."
Yeah, well, that was about 25 people, But look, I mean, those things do exist. The Scottish only joined the Union in order to get in on the slave trade, so in the 17th or 15th century. So, which was by then a purely English affair. But it was generating so much wealth that they thought it'd be good to get in. So the moment Britain starts being a little poorer, largely because it's left the European Union, you find nationalisms beginning to occur. What does stoke division and nationalisms tends to be poor economic performance. And you have to somehow allow people the opportunity to feel that they are in charge of their own destinies. We won't succeed as a centralized republic. And it's not to comment on the ANC or anything like that. It's about just people needing to feel that they can do things on their own, and that meaning being South African is a big wide thing, not a narrow thing.
Peter Bruce, let me thank you very much for your time and analysis of this Western Cape Provincial Powers Bill.